Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights, here with Pete Calderon. We're going to talk about his origin story. He's with Heritage, has been for a long time, but he's done many interesting things, and we've crossed paths even before those days. So I'm looking forward to hearing confirmation on some of the things I know about Pete, but hearing some new stuff too, and I hope you'll enjoy. But thanks, sponsors. Heritage is one of the sponsors, as well as Huggins Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, Becca Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication, ComC.com, and then, of course, Upper Deck, Panini, and Topps. Pete, you're probably familiar with most, if not all, of those sponsors, but Heritage was one of the first sponsors I thought of, not just because of the proximity, but Chris has really assembled a strong team, and you're one of them. So welcome to the show, and tell us a little about your origin story. Pete Calderon.
Okay, thank you for having me first. My story begins like most collectors. As a young kid, I collected cards. My grandfather had given me a few really old cards from his childhoods, and I think that's what got me started on vintage cards.
Grandfather, I thought I was doing well. My dad gave me cards were Gaudies and play balls, but what were your grandfather's cards? Were they?
He gave me a couple of caramel cards and a couple of T206s that he had just happened to save.
Pete?
And one of the things we did, he would take me to Wrigley Field. We go to Cubs games, so that just developed a love of baseball. And then when he gave me the cards, I was just fascinated by them. And then that led into obviously looking for more cards and introduced me to what was being issued at the time. And ironically enough, the first cards I can remember buying was actually Topps King Kong. Obviously, baseball followed very shortly, but I remember the King Kong cards. But I was a huge fan of both the baseball cards, football cards, Star Wars cards, Close Encounters, everything that was coming out at the time. I just wanted to collect it all.
Was this 70s, late 70s? Or what?
Yeah, it was the mid to late 70s, yeah. The first really big year I was into collecting cards that I recall is 1978. That's when I had a couple of friends in the neighborhood also were collecting. So that really got us interested, and that got us in trading and things like that. And that's really when it took off for me.
Well, I mean, you're one of the few guys I'm going to talk to that beats my story about my dad with your grandfather. My dad didn't have any T cards or E cards, but because of that, do we have that similar path here that because my dad had collected and gave me some of his cards, I knew there was more than just 78 Topps or 56 Topps in my situation. So did you always have the allure of the older cards?
Yes.
Did you move into that pretty quickly?
Yes, I did. And I think like I said, obviously it started with that, but yeah, I always was interested in the older cards. In the late 70s, there were some reprint sets that were coming out. I bought all of those. There was just something about the older cards that really grabbed my imagination, as much as I enjoyed the modern ones too. But yeah, I always had a fascination with the vintage cards. And my friends used to tease me that, I knew more about the 1909 Cubs than I did about the 1989 Cubs. So it was just something that was in me. And I have a general like for history and old things and antiques and things like that. So it's just always been a part of me.
What advantage do you think you had? I just had Steve Grad on, and I know he's a longtime friend. I think there's an advantage in Chicago. There's a reason it's the primary home of the National. It is a fabulous collecting city, and that's most of your upbringing, right?
Yes, absolutely. I grew up in Chicago. It is a great collecting city. It's a great sports city. If you're, in front of those Chicago fans, those players aren't just liked and adored; they're worshipped. And yeah, it's a great town. And like you said, for collectors, it's got such a long history that it really is one of the ideal locations next to the East Coast for the collector to find older cards and things.
Were you an autograph hound too? Because I know
never really was an autograph hound. I did briefly dabble with autographs early on. I don't want to say too much, but seeing some of the experiences with some of the players who I will just say were maybe somewhat less than cordial just turned me off a little bit. And then what I was seeing, what I felt were in terms of auto pens and fakes, and then just a general distrust. Never really got into the autograph part of it. I do have some autographs, but only ones that I had signed in person.
But again, you don't have that problem if you're collecting dead people.
Exactly.
You've got they can do no wrong.
Right. Yeah. No steroid scandals, nothing.
Okay. What did you collect straight through, or did you have a hiatus?
I think the only time I took a break was when I was in college. For a couple of years there, I worked through school, so there was a slow area. Always was reading and any magazines that had come out, baseball card magazine, Sport Americana books, Lou Lipsitz books. So even though I wasn't maybe actively buying for a little while, I was just always reading up on information and still going to shows and looking at what was out there and what dealers had. So I was always involved. But yeah, there was a little brief time in college where I took a look.
And are you, Pete, are you 90% baseball?
I would say so, yeah. 90% mostly baseball and non-sports.
Yeah, and tending toward older cards.
Yes. But I mean, I collected the modern, what was coming out at the time. But yeah, my interest was always deepest in the older card. Love the 50s and 60s, the Mars Attacks, Civil War News, Horrors of War, and the Indian gum cards I always like. My real fascination, though, is the 1880s and 1890s cards. Just the lithography is just absolutely great. And the fact that I went to art school, I got a bachelor's degree in art. So that kind of getting involved in the printing processes and what they were at the time really gave me a good background for, I think, helped me with the cards because I can recognize reprints, I can recognize print techniques, and it helped me a lot having that background.
How long have you been full-time in the organized hobby? Quite a while.
I started working for Mastro. Back, I knew in grading cards, I got to know Derek Grady, and I got to know a couple of people that worked for Mastro at the time. And then when the position opened, I applied for it, and they tested me, and history was made, as they say. So I worked with Mastro for a few years, and then July was my 12th anniversary here at Heritage. I moved from Chicago to Dallas. It was funny. Everybody told me that was my midlife crisis because I just was turning 40. And instead of doing something crazy, I packed my life up and took a job in Dallas. And it's been 12 years. It was a good decision. And contrary to what people were telling me, no, I don't miss the Chicago winters. And was a great move.
Chicago is certainly one of the epicenters of the industry, of the hobby, but so is Dallas now, not just with my own company.
There's certain things about Chicago. It's a great city. I miss the lakefront and things like that. And there were a lot of collectors there that I got to meet and talk to at shows and things like that. Now with what communication is and internet and social media, you really don't lose those connections anymore. But one of the reasons why I do love the National so much is because I meet so many people. During the year, it's just emails and phone calls, and now I actually get to put a face to it, and hopefully one day again be able to shake hands again. And but that's one of the reasons why I really love the national shows, and I've gone to I've gone to most of them.
This is your origin story, and I know that when I think you've written for Becca Media. I don't think that was when I was there. I think that was after, or was it? Was it in the 2000s?
I don't think you were there at that time. It was when Becca came out with that vintage card magazine, and I was thrilled because the first article I wrote for them was the cover of the first issue. And then I continued to do a column for them for about a little over a year about candy cards, which has always been my favorite area to collect. And that was like one of my big thrills, is the fact that I got the cover story.
I can't say that was my call, but if I would have agreed with it if I'd have been there, because you certainly know your stuff. But one of the things, what my point was, when we hired people like you, who had a lot of knowledge to come in and do a job, they still, in many cases, wanted to continue their collecting because at heart they were a collector. And
right.
So to what extent have you had to define or shape your collecting? Are there any policies that Heritage has that it doesn't seem like you'd be able to cherry pick auction items that come out, but you do still, I would imagine, maintain some collecting interest. So is there a policy, or is it not a big deal?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm still collecting. There is no official policy. Heritage is very clear about when they hired me regarding that. There's not I know some people have some issues with it, but as an employee, I can bid in the auctions. I pay all the fees. I pay all the taxes. If you want to criticize me, yes, I don't pay shipping, but it is still something, that employees can participate in the auctions. And the truth is, if you didn't have a deep rooted appreciation and love for what we're doing here, this job would be torture, because you would literally be surrounded by cards and boxes and collections and musty smells. And if you didn't love that, it's not a job that anybody could do. So it's only natural that a collector would be the type of person you want in a position like this. If there was any caveats, you're just careful about selling things. If I do sell something, sometimes it's through eBay, most of the time it would be through Heritage if I sold something. And they just don't want, if there was a policy, it was don't do that to the extent where it seems like you're a dealer. Obviously, collectors are going to buy and sell here and there, which I do, but just not to the extent where I would be considered a dealer. I'm basically selling my dupes.
That was basically what kind of our policy was. I mean, if you're like a dealer and you're working on our team, it's eventually.
And it's just, I know some collectors don't like that, but if you're going to consign something that I'm interested in, do you really want me out of the bidding?
It's like working in a 5-star restaurant, but you're not allowed to try the food.
Right, exactly, yeah.
You just got to smell it as it goes by, and you work here, you can't have any of that food.
Yeah, if you're working for Ford, you're not going to pull into the parking lot driving a Chevy,
You'd be pulling out, driving a Chevy. Yeah. Good point. Okay, are you a want list guy, or you just, when you're doing your collecting, you just know what you see something interesting, and you obviously know the values extremely well. So are you more opportunistic, or do you have a want list?
No, I'm basically a set collector. So there's a number of sets that I collect. I just basically look for cards that I like at prices that I like. I've never been a huge condition person. I don't need mints and gem mints. So if it's a card in a set that I want, and if it's I have a set value or set price that I know I want to pay, if I get outbid, I get outbid. Believe me, it happens a lot. But if there's something I really want, I will get silly. But for the most part, and there's for whatever area I'm collecting, I just go card by card. I've been putting together a couple sets for 30 years now. But so it's a process for me, and to me that's the joy. It's about I look at certain cards and I remember who I bought them from and conversations we had, and fortunately getting to the point now where people are retiring from the hobby or they're passing away, and so it's nice to have those memories and not just an album full of cards.
Pete, I'm old enough to be a dinosaur. I didn't think you were too. I think we're old school in that regard. But
You're right.
are you do you upgrade, or do you just have a good enough condition, something's nice enough, or are you looking to upgrade on some of your sets?
For the most part, no, because I'll buy a card in the condition that I like. If it's a really rare card and it's horrible condition, then I will buy that. But ironically enough, even if the opportunity comes to upgrade, I really don't. It's just never been a focus for me. I like to have a nice even condition range, mid grade, but upgrading is not something that I do a lot.
Again, I think this might be the last question here, but how big an advantage do you think you have, not for working at Heritage, but because of your art background and your understanding of printing, that you would be one of the very few guys who does not have to buy graded old cards?
I would say that is very true. And yes, my background has helped me in this term where I get the greatest advantage is recognizing forgeries, recognizing reprints, recognizing old, lithography. And one thing I remember is a poster a guy was selling. Well, I recognized the font, and the font wasn't developed until the 1950s, but this was supposed to be a poster from 1909. So I told him, I said, well, there's no way this poster could be real. So in situations like that, I definitely have an advantage with my background. And like every other collector, I bought bad cards. It's always once. We always have that experience. Working in the printing companies, I was able to have access to the cutters and printers. So I actually took the bad cards that I bought and I actually cut them up for no other reason, just to see the cuts, just to see what this printer would do, what that cutter would do, what this cutter would do. So having that access, it definitely has helped me considerably.
I don't know that your origin story is compelling. It's just that people can't turn back the clock. You actually paid your dues. And it's the reason why with candy cards, if you find these e-cards and T-cards, you're out there, and if they're not graded, sometimes there can be suspicion there, but you're somebody that can fend for yourself and know that it just might be a collection that never got graded.
True, very true. Because a lot of times collections are recently discovered by people, so they're not going to be graded. But yeah, this is the era of grading, and there is a really high grade card being offered somewhere. People have to ask the question, why isn't it graded? But yes, like you said, I mean, for hopefully more than most, I'm able to tell without it being graded whether or not the card is good or not.
We're going to stop now, Pete, but I just, again, it's really cool when I hear the story of somebody that their gifting and their experiences all come together to give you a really important niche in the hobby. And I try to do that myself, but
thank you.
But I have some math skills. So thanks, listeners. Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Heritage and other sponsors. We'll be back again tomorrow with another episode.